Rampant fan mail, shocking proclivities, and a missed Metallica concert. Richard Ramirez's life in prison was pretty eventful. In the mid-1980s, residents of Southern California were terrorized by the Night Stalker, a serial killer who was eventually revealed to be one Richard Ramirez. It's unknown just how many people Ramirez tortured, assaulted, and killed, as several unsolved cases may have had something to do with him. For instance, in 2009, DNA evidence connected him to a particularly brutal cold case, according to the Los Angeles Times. The remains of a little girl named Mei Leung were discovered on April 10, 1984, and it wasn't until decades later that Ramirez was finally identified as her killer. By the time he was captured, Ramirez would kill at least 14 people, and he would also be connected to a series of horrifying sexual assaults. His trial wrapped up with a unanimous decision. Ramirez was found guilty on all 43 charges against him. He was handed the death penalty and sentenced to death 19 times over. As he waited for his execution to be carried out and for his appeals to go through, Ramirez was held at California's San Quentin State Prison. Ramirez spent the rest of his life on death row. In 2013, he died, but not in the gas chamber, as he was sentenced to. The official cause of his death was complications from B-cell lymphoma. By all accounts, Richard Ramirez was no less of a monster behind bars.
He wasn't exactly the model prisoner.
Lieutenant Sam Robinson, a spokesperson for San Quentin, revealed that Ramirez would regularly perform sexual acts in front of visitors and guards. According to Robinson, Ramirez had a tendency to expose himself in front of children. In fact, after a 2004 incident involving a young girl who was visiting another prisoner, Ramirez's interactions with other people were severely restricted. Robinson explained to the Daily Beast, "All of his visits were behind a partition. He wasn't allowed to touch someone or hug them. He would also expose himself inside the housing unit to guards. We put signs in front of the cell saying he has the propensity to do that." Shelley Ramirez, the niece of the notorious serial killer, revealed that her uncle's death was a relief. Shelley was only 7 years old when the Night Stalker was sent to San Quentin, but as an adult, she visited her uncle. However, as Shelley confirmed to the Daily Beast, Richard touched himself during her visit, and he condemned her for wearing a gold cross. Afterwards, she sought counseling to help her deal with the incident. As she told the publication, "I felt really dirty and gross. I never had contact with him again."
This is a wicked world. And in a wicked world, wicked people are born.
As strange as it sounds, Richard Ramirez was ridiculously popular. While he was on trial, he leaned hard into his image as a satanic child of darkness, and people were fascinated by it. As noted by Psychology Today, Ramirez said in court, "Legions of the night, night breed, repeat not the errors of the Night Stalker and show no mercy. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells within all of us."
I'll see you in Disneyland.
Ramirez's gruesome celebrity only continued after he was convicted. He spent a lot of his prison time responding to his fan mail and corresponding with the scores of people who wrote to him. As Psychology Today reported, Ramirez once said of his fan base, "I think the girls are attracted to me because they can relate to me. The girls are nice when you're in my situation, but since I'm in here, I spend more time writing to them about the relationship rather than living it. But there are good friendships formed nevertheless." When Ramirez died in 2013, a San Quentin spokesperson told NBC that the Night Stalker received more fan mail than any other inmate on death row. Photos taken of Richard Ramirez just after his arrest are drastically different from those taken later in his life, and that's because he had his teeth fixed. Ramirez had missing and decaying teeth for some time, which were mentioned repeatedly by victims who often described the man who had attacked them. Police knew early on that they were looking for someone who had shaggy black hair and terrible teeth. Ramirez's teeth were instrumental in catching him too, when a trip to the dentist put him in the area where the murders took place. However, later pictures of Ramirez showed him sporting some newly pearly whites, and they reportedly took a lot of work. He had one root canal carried out, some of his teeth were filled with compounds, and his severe decay, which was caused by a lifetime of not brushing, eating sugary foods, and using cocaine, was also fixed. Cindy Hayden was one of the jurors in Richard Ramirez's trial. When one of her fellow jurors was killed in 1989, she told the Los Angeles Times, "My first thought was that we were all going to be picked off one by one. Who's next?" When she later appeared on Geraldo, she seemed to have changed her mind. When asked if she cared for Ramirez, she responded,
"Yes, I do. That's just one side of him."
The daughter of Ramirez's 10th and 11th official victims confronted Hayden on the show via a phone call and described in detail what had been done to her parents. When asked by the host how she could have feelings for a butcher, Hayden responded,
"I look beyond that. I look at what's behind that."
Hayden subsequently revealed that she believed Ramirez didn't get a fair trial. She also spent many of her days visiting him in jail. Hayden added that he was allegedly spending much of his time trying to understand why he had done the things he did. For history collection, Hayden was reportedly able to spend so much time with Ramirez because she had gotten her private investigator's license. This allowed her to accompany his defense team on visits, and also gave her some alone time with the killer she helped convict. Richard Ramirez never failed to attract fangirls. In 1990, KRON4 interviewed spectators at his trial, one of whom said,
I just wanted to see what he looked like. I think he's cute.
In 1991, the El Paso Times reported that hundreds of women lined up for a chance to go behind bars to visit with Ramirez. At the time, security was shockingly lax. Not only did visitors not even have to share their names, but conversations weren't monitored or recorded. Sergeant Rich Dyer of the San Francisco Sheriff's Department explained to the publication, "They just ask for the prisoner they want to see, and when it's Ramirez, he always does see them. Their conversations aren't monitored, so we don't know what they talk about. A lot of them appear to be women who have never met him, but some have come back to visit some more." In those early days of his incarceration, Ramirez reportedly met with an average of around 8 to 10 women a week. Others were turned away simply because there wasn't enough time for them all. As one anonymous female visitor told SF-Gate, "He is good looking and I loved his big hands. The thrill of danger of going up to a state penitentiary made it all worth it because to me, it was like a dream come true to face one of the world's most feared men." Richard Ramirez found a bride among the flocks of women who visited him in prison. Doreen Leoy married Ramirez in 1996 while he was on death row. The pair tied the knot a few years after Leoy started sending Ramirez letters, a connection that started soon after his conviction. According to the Los Angeles Times, Leoy admitted to visiting Ramirez around 4 times a week and always taking breath mints with her so she could kiss with confidence. The year after they tied the knot, Leoy told CNN, "He's kind, he's funny, he's charming. I think he's really a great person. He's my best friend. He's my buddy." At the time, Leoy revealed she believed Ramirez was innocent and that she was willing to suffer the loneliness of being married to a man on death row if it meant she was with him. However, that seems to have changed after DNA evidence concretely tied Ramirez to the murder of 9-year-old May Leon. San Quentin spokesperson Lieutenant Sam Robinson told the Daily Beast that the Night Stalker had no visitors in the years leading up to his death, and the Sun suggested that Leoy stopped visiting her husband in 2009. A few months after Richard Ramirez died on death row, the New York Post spoke to an anonymous source who said, "Being incarcerated went against everything Ramirez was about. He hated being cooped up in a cell, but he valued his freedom to roam the streets and kill." According to the source, Ramirez first tried to put an escape plan into motion on September 21, 1993. At the time, he was traveling between San Quentin and a San Francisco court to face charges. When he was scanned with a handheld metal detector, it went off. Guards found that he had inserted a syringe, a ballpoint pen, a handcuff key, and a sticker into his rectal cavity. He was reportedly going to fake an illness to get sent to a hospital, which typically had much less security than the prison. The second escape attempt didn't occur until 1998. Authorities were apparently alerted to the escape attempt thanks to one of his many fan letters, which suggested he had a possible accomplice on the outside. This particular fan was immediately put on a restricted list, denying her access to the killer. In 2003, Metallica headed inside San Quentin for a 10-song concert for the prison inmates, per Rolling Stone. In an interview with NME in 2022, Kirk Hammett confirmed that Ramirez was a Metallica fan. Hammett found this out when he was given Ramirez's personal copy of a magazine with the band on the cover. According to the guards, Ramirez had been able to hear the concert from his cell on death row. However, he'd apparently been so outraged that he hadn't been allowed to watch the performance that he spent the whole time pacing back and forth. Hammett recalled to NME, "He hung out in Richmond, California, and I wonder sometimes if me and the guys from his earlier band were at the same parties as him back in the day." Richard Ramirez was sent to San Quentin in 1989 and was still being held there when he died in 2013. As prison spokesperson Lieutenant Sam Robinson told the Daily Beast, the Night Stalker's final years were lonely ones. Ramirez's access to other inmates and their visitors had been severely restricted in 2004 when he exposed himself to a young girl in the visitor's room. Despite having his privileges returned at some point, they were revoked again in 2007. By 2010, Ramirez had lost the privilege of having any personal visits whatsoever. Even after his visiting privileges were restored, Ramirez apparently started refusing all visitors, Robinson told the Daily Beast. He also wasn't allowed to come in contact with any other inmates on death row after a fight reportedly broke out in the prison yard in 2000. It would seem that Ramirez spent his final days alone in his cell with only his television for company. After Richard Ramirez died in 2013, the New York Post spoke with a source who had reportedly seen him in his last days and said, "He was the color green. He looked like a green highlighter pen. He was sitting up in his bed doing stretches." Following his death, Ramirez's autopsy revealed multiple illnesses. The one that killed him was B-cell lymphoma, per USA Today. The Marin County coroner also found that he was suffering from hepatitis C and complications from chronic substance abuse, which reportedly occurred prior to his incarceration.